Snow blasts sideways across the crowded rail crossing as a man kneels on the frozen steel with his wrists bound, breath shaking in the blizzard, while a German shepherd stands beside him in perfect control, leash slack, eyes fixed on the red glow of an approaching freight train. The dog does not bark. It waits for a command that has not yet been given. Around them, strangers lift phones instead of hands, arguing over whether this is staged while wind tears their voices apart. A transit officer shouts from behind a flashing barrier that no one is allowed past the line. The rails begin to vibrate under the ice. The shepherd lowers into a tense down position on a single whisper, muscles tight, gaze unwavering, snow collecting along its back. Someone yells that the train is less than a minute away. Cameras move closer. The man stops struggling and looks only at the dog. In moments like this, what would you choose to do? Watch or step forward? Share your thoughts below and stand with Brave Canine Stories by subscribing, because the horn is growing louder and the ground is starting to shake. The town sits at the edge of the valley like it has been placed there and forgotten, a thin line of rooftops and silent storefronts pressed against miles of white wilderness. He lives just beyond it, in a small weather-worn cabin where the wind speaks louder than neighbors and the nights stretch long without interruption. His past is not something he advertises. The only hints are the way he folds his jacket with precision, the way his boots are always cleaned even after storms, and the way he scans open spaces before stepping into them. He once belonged to units that moved in shadows and made decisions measured in seconds. Now, he checks stranded vehicles during blizzards and carries a basic emergency kit in the back of his truck. The German shepherd beside him is not a pet in the casual sense. The dog moves with training etched into muscle memory, leash loose, posture balanced, waiting for cues that come in whispers or hand signals. Their bond is built on repetition and trust rather than affection alone. The winter morning is harsh even by valley standards. Snow drifts sideways across the service road that runs parallel to the rail line, erasing edges and swallowing sound. The world feels reduced to wind and white space. He walks with steady rhythm, breath controlled, the dog at heel, shoulder aligned with his knee. They have already pushed one stalled car free from shallow snow and refused a thermos of coffee with polite nods. Helping is something he does without conversation. The rails ahead cut a dark line through the frozen landscape, steel half buried beneath ice. The dog slows first. Not fear, not resistance, just a subtle tightening through the leash and a lift of the nose toward the wind. He notices immediately. "Easy," he murmurs, and the dog lowers its head but keeps tension in its stance. A gust passes, then a brief pocket of silence opens between howls of air. In that silence he hears a faint metallic clink, rhythmic and wrong, too deliberate to be debris striking steel. He kneels, brushing powdery snow aside with gloved fingers, revealing shallow grooves etched into the ice near the rail. They resemble dragged boots rather than footsteps. The dog sits without being told twice, eyes sweeping the open distance while remaining exactly where commanded. He rises slowly, scanning the surroundings. A torn strip of dark fabric flutters from a signal post, snapping against metal. He removes it and slips it into his pocket without conscious thought, an old reflex resurfacing. Footprints cross the snowfield ahead. They come in pairs but leave in singles, uneven spacing suggesting struggle or imbalance. The air carries a faint chemical scent beneath the clean bite of winter, something synthetic that does not belong outdoors. The rails beneath his boots hum almost imperceptibly, earlier than the schedule should allow. He checks the rail timetable on his phone and frowns at the updated arrival, a freight train marked sooner than expected. The wind intensifies, snow thickening until the horizon dissolves. Across the crossing, the barrier lights flicker once, then again, malfunctioning before stabilizing. The valley feels suddenly smaller, sound trapped close to the ground. He gestures with 2 fingers, and the dog moves forward, heel maintained, body quiet but coiled with awareness. Another gust lifts and drops, and through the shifting white curtain he notices a dark shape low against the steel far ahead. At first it appears like discarded tarp or fallen signage, but the proportions refuse to settle into anything harmless. The dog's ears snap forward in perfect synchronization. He lowers his palm. Down. he whispers, and the German Shepherd folds instantly into the snow, eyes locked on the shape. He leans forward, narrowing his gaze, and the outline resolves into a human figure against the frozen track. The routine morning fractures into urgency. He begins to move, slow and deliberate, knowing the silence has ended and something irreversible is already in motion. By the time he reaches the official crossing point, the quiet isolation of the rail line has dissolved into noise and movement. A knot of people stands clustered near the lowered barrier, coats pulled tight, scarves flapping in the wind, phones already raised. Laughter cuts through the storm, sharp and careless. Two men angle their cameras toward the tracks, narrating loudly as if they are hosting a live show rather than witnessing a crisis. One of them jokes that it has to be a social media stunt. The other zooms in, grinning, asking his viewers how many likes it will take before someone pretends to help. Their words carry farther than they realize, riding the wind toward the frozen steel. He gives a small downward gesture, and the German Shepherd folds instantly into a sit beside his leg, posture straight, eyes forward. Snow collects along the dog's back, but it does not shake or fidget. The discipline is unmistakable. He steps closer to the barrier and tries to explain what he has seen ahead on the track, keeping his voice even, pointing toward the distant shape. The response is a wave of overlapping opinions. Someone accuses him of overreacting. Another voice says the person must have tied himself for attention. A woman insists no one would actually put themselves in danger like that unless they wanted views. The conversation becomes a performance, each sentence louder than the last. A local security guard moves in front of him, hand raised, jacket marked with reflective stripes dulled by snow. The guard cites policy, liability, restricted access. The words are delivered with rehearsed firmness, as if reciting a script learned by heart. The German Shepherd remains seated despite the rising volume, head aligned with the man's knee, gaze fixed ahead rather than on the crowd. "Focus," he whispers, and the dog's ears tilt forward without shifting position. The wind pushes at their coats, carrying the faint tremor of distant rails. He tries again to describe the danger, to emphasize the schedule update and the figure on the track, but his sentences are swallowed by the chorus of disbelief. The crowd thickens as more pedestrians drift over, drawn by flashing lights and raised voices. Phones rise higher, forming a ring of small glowing screens. Someone begins counting down loudly, claiming the train is less than 2 minutes away, turning urgency into spectacle. A few people edge closer to the barrier just to improve their angle. The guard threatens to call the police if he steps beyond the line. He inhales slowly, shoulders steady, jaw tight but controlled. The dog mirrors him perfectly, a living example of restraint in the center of chaos. "Quiet," he murmurs, and the shepherd's breathing slows, its tail still. Across the street, through the blur of falling snow, a white delivery van idles at the curb with hazard lights blinking in steady orange rhythm. It looks ordinary at first glance, just another vehicle waiting out the storm, but something holds his attention. The engine hums too smoothly for the temperature, exhaust barely visible. The rear doors are blank, no company logo, no faded lettering. On the dashboard rests a pair of heavy work gloves, palms darkened with use. He shifts his angle slightly and catches the reflection of the license plate in a shallow puddle of slush, memorizing the partial numbers without breaking stride. Nearby, a mounted transit camera faces away from the tracks entirely, aimed toward an empty stretch of road where nothing is happening. The train horn echoes faintly through the valley, low and distant, but unmistakable. The sound changes the tone of the crowd. Laughter thins, replaced by nervous murmurs, yet the phones remain raised. The guard steps closer, repeating the warning about trespassing. Snow thickens, visibility narrowing until shapes blur at the edges. He feels frustration surge, hot and immediate, but he lets it pass without expression. Approval no longer matters. The situation ahead is real whether anyone believes it or not. He lifts his hand slightly, a silent signal. The German Shepherd rises from its sit only when the gesture completes, falling into heel position without pulling. The barrier stands between him and the track, policy and noise pressing from behind. He steps forward anyway, choosing movement over permission, action over acceptance, and the dog moves with him, as if the decision had been made long before the crowd ever arrived. He has barely cleared the barrier when two men step directly into his path, boots crunching into the snow with deliberate weight. Their smiles are thin, polite on the surface but edged with something sharper underneath. One raises both palms as if calming a situation that does not need calming, insisting that nobody should go any closer for safety reasons. The other nods, echoing the word safety like it is a shield against responsibility. Their positioning is precise, shoulders angled just enough to form a wall without appearing aggressive. The German Shepherd stays perfectly aligned at heel, eyes forward, ignoring the men's voices and the gestures waved near its face. Snow clings to its fur, unmoving. He asks them to step aside, voice low, steady, the tone of someone who is used to being obeyed without raising volume. They exchange a glance and laugh quietly, suggesting the scene ahead is nothing more than a viral stunt that someone will reveal as a joke any second. One of them points back toward the crowd as if inviting applause. The other leans slightly closer, blocking the narrow space between rail posts. Their words are casual, but their feet do not shift. The train horn rolls again in the distance, closer now, the vibration beginning to travel through the frozen ground. Without breaking eye contact, he slips his phone from his pocket and taps the screen once. The camera opens silently. He lifts it to chest height as if checking a message, lens angled outward. Faces, voices, their exact positions fall into frame without announcement. The dog senses the change in his breathing and adjusts half a step, placing its body between him and the nearer man without touching him. "Easy," he murmurs, and the shepherd holds the line, a living boundary drawn without force. He pivots sideways, moving around them in a smooth arc that leaves no room for confrontation. Their hands rise instinctively, not to stop him, but to avoid being brushed by the dog's shoulder. He drops to one knee beside the bound figure on the track. The plastic ties bite into the man's wrists, thick and rigid, the kind used for industrial bundling rather than household packaging. He tests one lightly and feels the density immediately, not improvised. Intentional. He angles the phone slightly, capturing the trembling fingers, the pale skin losing color, the rail beneath them humming like distant thunder. Snow gathers along the edges of the steel. The bound man whispers something too faint to carry, lips cracked from cold. Behind him, the two blockers fall quiet, realizing the small rectangle of glass is pointed their way more often than not. He notices details without turning his head. Fresh tire tracks cut across the snow near the crossing, deeper than a single pass would leave. His phone screen flickers as the transit schedule app refreshes itself again and again, glitching as if struggling to hold a stable time. The rhythm of the rail hum is wrong, earlier and stronger than expected. He issues a soft guard, and the dog shifts its stance slightly, not growling, not lunging, simply occupying space with calm authority. One of the men takes a half step back, the other glances toward the road. The crowd's tone changes behind him, laughter thinning into uneasy murmurs. Phones lower a fraction. The snow thickens, flakes growing larger, swallowing edges of sound. Doubt gives way to certainty inside him, the moment when observation becomes commitment. Whatever this is, it is not a joke, and walking away is no longer an option. "Back," he whispers, and the shepherd adjusts again, creating a small pocket of safety around his kneeling position. He rises slowly, sweeping the camera across the scene as if checking reception. Across the street, the white delivery van idles with hazard lights blinking in steady rhythm. The rear doors remain blank, no markings, no company name. As it begins to roll forward, tires whispering over slush, he lifts the phone just enough to catch the license plate clearly in frame. The van turns the corner and disappears into the storm, but the numbers remain frozen on his screen, a small detail that feels suddenly heavier than the falling snow. The flashing barrier lights throw red pulses across the snow as a dark sedan slides to a stop near the crossing, and a man in a thick transit coat steps out, collar raised against the wind. He moves with the confidence of someone used to issuing instructions rather than hearing them. Without asking what happened, he lifts a hand and orders everyone back behind the line, voice amplified by authority more than volume. The crowd parts slightly, phone still raised but drifting backward. He repeats that the situation is under control, that protocols are already in motion, that interference will only complicate matters. The words fall into the air like rehearsed lines delivered too quickly. He asks for an immediate rail stoppage, keeping his tone even despite the cold biting into his cheeks. The manager shakes his head, claiming communication delays, layered approvals, systems that cannot be overridden on impulse. He mentions fines, liability, and legal consequences as if they are weights meant to pin everyone in place. Snow streaks across the man's coat, but he never once glances toward the bound figure on the track. His eyes remain fixed on the crowd, on optics, on control. The German Shepherd sits beside its handler, posture rigid yet calm, breath steady. "Watch," he murmurs, and the dog's ears tilt forward without shifting its paws. From the edge of the gathering, another figure steps forward, wearing a reflective vest that catches the red barrier light in dull flashes. He approaches with exaggerated certainty, extending an arm as if guiding a misplaced pedestrian rather than confronting a crisis. He claims to be with transit security and gestures for the protagonist to follow him away from the tracks. Something about the movement feels wrong, rehearsed but hollow. A subtle flick of fingers is all it takes. The dog rises from its sit into a standing position, shoulders squared, issuing a low controlled growl that vibrates more than it sounds. It does not lunge. It does not bare teeth. The vest wearer falters mid-step, uncertainty slipping through the performance. He studies the vest in a single glance. The shade of orange does not match official transit branding. Too bright, too clean. No identification badge swings from the chest. No radio earpiece crackles at the collar. The man's boots are dry despite the storm, as if he arrived only moments ago. He points calmly to the absence of credentials, his voice steady, forcing the crowd's attention onto the discrepancy. Murmurs ripple outward, phones shifting angles to capture the exchange. The vest wearer lowers his arm, confidence thinning as quickly as the snowfall thickens. Behind him, the transit manager continues speaking about procedures, but his gaze never touches the signal box mounted beside the crossing. He avoids it entirely, eyes sliding past the blinking lights, as if they are decorations rather than warnings. The bound man on the track lifts his head just enough to whisper that he was forced there, two masked individuals pushing him down before the storm swallowed their footsteps. The confession is barely audible, but it travels through the circle of listeners like a spark finding dry tinder. Pressure builds from every direction. The train horn now cuts clearly through the wind, longer and closer, a sound that turns conversation into urgency. The signal lights switch from idle flashes to a rapid red pulse, reflecting off drifting snow and pale faces. The dog remains standing, muscles taut but controlled. "Down," he whispers, and the shepherd lowers smoothly, discipline overriding instinct. Its restraint becomes a silent statement that control is still possible even as chaos edges nearer. He feels the moment tighten, the space between decision and consequence narrowing with every vibration in the rail. The manager threatens penalties again, the vest wearer fades backward, and the crowd wavers between obedience and doubt. He does not argue further. He steps slightly aside, shielding the bound man from the wind, and dials emergency services with gloved fingers. Coordinates spill from memory, precise and unshaken. He recites the partial license plate of the white van, each number deliberate. The call ends, the phone lowers, and he remains where he stands, refusing to move as the storm thickens and the distant roar of the approaching train begins to fill the valley. The emergency operator's voice cuts through the static of the storm, calm but edged with urgency. "Similar incidents," she says, "near freight lines in neighboring towns. Bound individuals discovered just before train arrivals. Footage used later for anonymous demands." The words land heavier than the snow piling on his shoulders. This is not an isolated act. It is a sequence repeated with precision. He glances down at the German shepherd, fingers brushing the thick fur at its neck. The dog's breathing is slow and steady, eyes lifted toward him, grounding him in the present as the realization settles that this is larger than the single figure shivering against the rail. The transit manager steps closer, voice sharpened now, insisting the line cannot be stopped because of cargo priority and network schedules that ripple across counties. He speaks of contracts and chain reactions, of penalties measured in numbers too large for a single crossing to outweigh. The argument sounds rehearsed, institutional, built to withstand emotion. Behind him, the crowd splits into murmuring clusters. Some nod in agreement, arms crossed, citing rules and liability. Others shift uneasily, glancing toward the bound man and the dog, their certainty thinning. The antagonists sense the hesitation and step forward again, voices louder, warning that interference will bring legal consequences, that unauthorized action will be recorded and reported. Across the street, through the falling snow, the white delivery van reappears at the far curb with its headlights off. It sits there like a shadow that forgot to leave. He notices the side mirror first, a strip of silver duct tape wrapped around the edge, catching the red flash of the barrier lights. It is a small detail, but it fixes the vehicle in his memory like a pin on a map. The German Shepherd remains seated on command, posture unwavering despite the shifting noise around them. "Focus," he murmurs, and the dog's gaze returns to the line of steel ahead, ears forward, tail still. The bound man turns his head slightly, lips cracked from cold, voice thin, but urgent. He says he overheard them talking before they forced him down, heard them mention staging multiple scenes along different routes, using fear and footage to extract money from strangers who never expected to be involved. The confession moves through the crowd like a change in weather. Phones lower. Conversations fragment. Yet the manager doubles down, threatening arrest if anyone tampers with transit property. The antagonists echo him, confidence swelling as policy becomes their shield. He scans the snow around the crossing and notices another set of footprints he had missed earlier, looping in a wide circle before vanishing toward the road. The transit camera mounted above the barrier, previously angled away, suddenly swivels back toward the tracks with a mechanical whir, its red indicator light blinking alive. The shift feels deliberate, timed. The train schedule on his phone refreshes again, arrival sliding closer by minutes that seem to disappear faster than they should. The hum beneath the rails grows stronger, a vibration felt through boots and bone. A heavy awareness settles in his chest, the understanding that this moment is part of a chain rather than a single link. The dog's steady breathing anchors him, a rhythm that cuts through the rising noise of argument and wind. "Quiet," he whispers, and the shepherd's posture softens without losing readiness, discipline holding firm against instinct. Around them, voices rise and fall in competing waves, some urging action, others warning against it. Snow thickens, blurring the far edges of the street until only shapes remain. The van's hazard lights stay dark this time, no blinking signal to draw attention. It simply waits. He watches as the rear doors separate by a few inches, a narrow gap opening just enough to reveal movement inside. Someone is watching from the shadowed interior, observing the crossing, the crowd, the bound man, the dog. The realization tightens the air around him. The storm muffles sound, but the intent behind that silent observation is unmistakable, and the distance between pattern and proof shrinks to the width of a half-open door. The first beam of the train's lights cuts through the blizzard like a blade, white against white, growing larger with every heartbeat. The ground begins to tremble in a steady rhythm that travels up through his knees. Snow swirls in violent circles around the crossing, erasing distance, leaving only motion and noise. He drops beside the bound man again and pulls a small utility blade from his pocket, fingers stiff from cold. The plastic tie is thicker than it looked, industrial grade, edges digging into frozen skin. He presses the blade against it and pulls. The plastic bends but refuses to split, stretching just enough to steal seconds he does not have. Behind him, boots crunch fast through the snow. The reflective vest reappears, now flanked by two others, their movements urgent but unfocused. They reach for his shoulders, insisting he is interfering, that he needs to step back immediately. Their hands hover close enough to touch. A single word leaves his lips. Block. The German Shepherd moves instantly, sliding between him and the advancing figures without teeth, without sound, body angled sideways to create a barrier of fur and muscle. The motion is precise, practiced, decisive without aggression. The three men halt mid-step, startled more by discipline than threat. He shifts tactics. The blade is too slow. He slides it away and grips the plastic tie with both hands, then wedges his forearm against a rail bolt, using the frozen metal as leverage. The rail hum deepens, the approaching engine now visible as a pulsing glow through the storm. He twists hard. The plastic strains, creaks, but still holds. The crowd erupts into overlapping shouts, each voice offering a different instruction, none useful. The bound man's hands are turning pale, fingers trembling, breath shallow clouds against the cold air. One of the vest-wearer's companions steps back too quickly, heel catching on packed snow. His phone slips from his coat and skids across the ice, screen lighting as it lands. For a fraction of a second, the display faces upward. He sees a messaging app open, a cluster of location pins scattered along rail routes, red dots like small warnings blinking in different towns. He reaches with one hand, snapping a quick screenshot before the man snatches the device back. The train horn blasts, louder than before, shaking loose flakes from the signal posts. He notices the icon on the app, a small blue circle he has seen before, and at that same moment, a ringtone chirps from the distant white van across the street, the exact digital tone echoing through the wind. The connection is instant and undeniable. The van's engine idles, hazard lights still dark, its shape barely visible through the snow curtain. Beside the crossing, the transit control box door hangs slightly open, latch undone, wires exposed beneath frost. Another detail filed away even as seconds evaporate. "Back," he murmurs, and the dog steps half a pace behind him, still ready, still silent. The blade of light from the train grows wider, filling the track with glare. He braces again, twisting the plastic tie against the rail bolt with every ounce of strength left in his arms. The material groans, stretching thin. The crowd gasps as the horn blasts again, closer, vibrating through bone and steel alike. His pulse surges, but his movements remain measured, every motion deliberate. The shepherd's breathing is steady against his leg, a constant reminder that panic is a choice he cannot afford. The plastic finally snaps on one side with a sharp crack. One wrist comes free, skin reddened and raw. Relief flickers for less than a second before he sees the second tie still locked tight, digging into the other wrist like a frozen clamp. The train's lights flood the crossing now, snow turning to white fire around them. Voices rise into a single chaotic wave. He grips the remaining tie, jaw clenched, knowing there is no time left to search for another tool. One hand free, one still bound, and the roar of the approaching engine swallowing the last few seconds of distance. The roar of the approaching train fills the valley until it becomes less a sound and more a physical force pressing against the ribs. He leans over the remaining tie, fingers numb, trying to angle the blade for one last cut, when a boot lashes out from the side. The kick strikes his wrist, sharp and deliberate. The utility blade skids across the ice and disappears beneath drifting snow. For a fraction of a second, his hand hangs empty in the air, the loss of that small tool feeling like the ground dropping away beneath him. The German shepherd reacts to the sudden motion, muscles tightening, eyes snapping toward the aggressor. "Hold!" The word leaves his mouth low and exact. The dog launches forward, not in fury but in precision, front paw slamming down onto the antagonist's coat near the shoulder, pinning fabric and body to the frozen surface without teeth, without chaos. The man freezes in shock, arms flailing once before going still, immobilized more by discipline than force. The crowd gasps as the storm whips snow between them. The train horn blares again, long and unbroken, filling every open space. Another antagonist seizes the moment and grabs the bound man by the collar, trying to drag him backward off the rail for leverage, not to save him, but to control the situation. The bound man cries out as the remaining tie digs deeper into his wrist. Release. The shepherd withdraws instantly, pivoting mid-step and returning to heel as if pulled by an invisible line. The sudden obedience breaks the aggressor's confidence. For the first time, the crowd moves with purpose instead of commentary. 2 bystanders step forward, then 3 more, forming a loose barrier that blocks the antagonists from closing in again. Phones lower, hands rise. The balance shifts. He turns toward the transit control box, boots sliding over packed snow, heart hammering but movement steady. Warnings fly behind him, voices shouting about fines, arrests, consequences. The door of the box hangs open, wires exposed beneath frost. Inside, the emergency stop lever waits under a scratched metal label, the word worn thin as if someone had scraped at it repeatedly. He grips the handle and pulls. Sparks snap against the cold air, brief flashes of orange against white. The signal lights surge brighter. The train horn changes pitch but does not cease, now a continuous blast that vibrates through steel and bone alike. Across the street, the white van's engine revs loudly, the sound cutting through wind and noise. He catches sight of a small transit badge half buried near the fake authorities' boots, its clip broken, logo smudged with slush. Another piece of the pattern falling into place even as seconds evaporate. The shepherd stands rigid at heel, eyes fixed ahead, waiting for the next cue with unwavering focus. The crowd's barrier tightens, shoulders squared, blocking the path behind him. The train is slowing, but not enough. The second plastic tie remains locked around the bound man's wrist, digging into frozen metal as if fused there. Legal consequences loom like shadows, shouted warnings mixing with the howl of the storm. The line between observer and protector has vanished completely. There is no distance left to stand behind. He drops back to the track, sliding his arm beneath the rail, forcing his forearm into the narrow gap to create even the smallest slack. The steel vibrates violently against his sleeve as the locomotive's lights flood the crossing, snow igniting into blinding glare while the engine roars closer with unstoppable momentum. The emergency lever shudders under his grip, and the distant thunder of the freight train shifts tone. The scream of metal against metal changing from unstoppable momentum to reluctant resistance. It slows, but it does not stop. The headlights still surge forward through the blizzard, swallowing distance in enormous gulps of white light. His arm remains wedged beneath the rail, sleeve vibrating against frozen steel. He reaches for a broken signal bracket hanging loose beside the track, curls his fingers around the jagged metal edge, and uses it as leverage against the remaining plastic tie. Every ounce of his body weight presses down. The plastic stretches, thins, creaks. The bound man winces as the tension bites deeper. The German shepherd circles once on a quiet hand cue, forming a perimeter without barking, body angled toward the crowd and the approaching noise. The tie finally snaps with a sharp crack that cuts through the storm. The man's second wrist comes free just as the locomotive's lights flood the crossing in blinding brilliance. The dog lifts its head and gives a single bark, clear and controlled, not panic but signal, the sound carrying across the snow like a flare in the dark. In the distance, sirens answer. The train's brakes scream as it grinds forward, slowing yard by yard, heat hissing from the wheels into the frozen air. He pulls the freedman backward off the rail and steadies him on unsteady legs. The crowd exhales as one, a collective breath they did not realize they were holding. Police vehicles arrive first, lights reflecting off drifting snow, followed by transit enforcement trucks sliding carefully into position. He steps aside without drama, phone already in hand. Videos, screenshots, the partial license plate reflection, the messaging app image, all passed over calmly. Officers nod, taking notes, radios crackling with updates. Witnesses who had stood silent before now step forward, voices steadier, pointing toward the white van that has begun to edge away from the curb. Dispatch relays coordinates. A roadblock forms 2 streets over based on the reflected plate numbers and the clustered rail pins visible in the screenshot. Within minutes, confirmation comes through the radio that the van has been intercepted. The fake authority is questioned on the spot, his vest examined, the dropped transit badge lifted from the snow and sealed in an evidence bag. Under questioning, connections begin to surface, patterns linking him to staged incidents along multiple freight lines. The transit manager's earlier refusal is logged and reviewed, but officers acknowledge that the emergency lever had been pulled within allowable protocol once imminent danger became clear. The German shepherd receives a quiet hand signal and moves with precise focus toward a storage shed near the edge of the crossing. Nose low, steps measured. It stops beside a pile of snow and paws once. Behind a half-buried crate, officers recover discarded masks and gloves, physical proof aligning with the digital trail. An officer who has been watching the entire sequence approaches him with a measured expression and recognizes the calm crisis handling, the economical movements, the absence of panic. The question is asked softly, answered with a brief nod. No titles, no boasting, only context that explains skill without demanding attention. The shift in the crowd is visible, posture changing, phones lowering fully for the first time. Respect settles not as applause but as quiet acknowledgement. Paramedics kneel beside the rescued man, wrapping his wrists, checking circulation, lifting him onto a stretcher with careful hands. The train finally comes to a complete stop short of the crossing, brakes exhaling long clouds of steam into the storm. Statements are taken methodically. Charges are listed. Evidence is catalogued. No dramatic victories, no instant verdicts, only steady procedure unfolding exactly as it should. The German Shepherd returns to sit at his side, head high, eyes alert for the next cue. A child near the front of the crowd asks if the dog is a hero. He responds with a gentle down and a soft pat along the neck, redirecting praise toward teamwork, toward the people who stepped forward when it mattered. The police chief approaches last, voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear, thanking both man and dog for disciplined action that saved a life without unnecessary force. The storm begins to ease. Snowflakes grow lighter, drifting instead of striking. Sirens fade into the distance as vehicles depart one by one. The crowd, once loud and restless, finally claps with sincerity rather than spectacle. The German Shepherd shifts closer, resting its chin against his boot, breath warm against cold leather. He stands still, watching the last of the flashing lights disappear down the road, the crossing returning to silence, the steel rails glinting beneath the softer sky. Weeks pass, and the valley settles back into its familiar rhythm of wind, steel, and distant engines. The man who had been bound to the tracks returns one afternoon, shoulders still stiff but eyes clearer, carrying a pair of thick winter gloves folded carefully in both hands. He offers them without ceremony, a simple thank you, spoken more through gesture than words. They stand beside the same crossing where the snow once swallowed sound, now clear under pale sunlight. The German Shepherd sits quietly between them, tail brushing the gravel, accepting a brief scratch behind the ears before attention shifts back to the rails. There is no dramatic reunion, only acknowledgement that life continued because someone chose not to look away. The transit authority responds in its own measured way. New emergency signage appears along the line, bright and impossible to miss. Staff rotate through retraining sessions, procedures reviewed with a seriousness that had once been missing. The case connected to the white van expands across counties, threads linking together through digital trails and witness accounts. News travels quietly rather than explosively, updates shared in short articles and community meetings instead of headlines. Accountability arrives step by step, built from documentation rather than outrage. He returns to his routine volunteer checks along the service road, the same path he has walked for years. The difference now is subtle but visible. Drivers who once waved uncertainly now nod with recognition. Store owners lift a hand from doorways. Conversations remain brief, but the skepticism that once hovered in the air has thinned into respect. The German Shepherd receives a new harness patch from a local trainer, stitched with a small emblem symbolizing service rather than fame. The dog does not notice the change, but others do, and the meaning settles without explanation. One evening replaces the memory of the storm entirely. The sky turns amber as the sun lowers behind the ridge, and they walk beside the rail line in calm silence. No cameras, no raised voices, only the steady crunch of boots on gravel and the soft rhythm of the dog's breathing. He pauses near the crossing, kneels, and pours water into a collapsible bowl. The shepherd drinks, then lifts its head, droplets catching the fading light. In a small wooden box back at the cabin, he stores the torn strip of fabric and printed screenshots, reminders that details once dismissed as trivial can change the direction of events. A freight train passes slowly in the distance, controlled and predictable, its sound no longer a threat but a familiar echo rolling through the valley. Neighbors share the story not for spectacle, but for the lesson it carries, speaking about awareness and responsibility rather than heroics. The moment that once drew a crowd now exists as a quiet reference point, something remembered without being relived. He stands with one hand resting lightly on the dog's back, watching the last car disappear around the bend, understanding that nothing about the day was extraordinary except the decision made within it. Discipline and compassion save lives when noise tries to stop you. The first sign had been a faint scent carried on the wind, something synthetic where only winter air should have existed. Shallow scuff marks followed, leading toward the tracks like erased footprints. Mockery rose from bystanders with phones held high, laughter masking uncertainty. A security barrier blocked access, policy becoming an obstacle rather than protection. The white van idled without branding, its presence too ordinary to draw immediate suspicion. Professional plastic ties revealed intention rather than accident. A fake authority, attempted removal, vest bright but credentials absent. The transit manager refused a stoppage, citing schedules over safety. A messaging app clue slipped into view when a phone fell, red pins marking multiple rail lines. The emergency lever was pulled under protest, sparks cutting through the storm. Physical interference crossed the line into aggression, forcing commitment. The dog executed a controlled pin that immobilized without harm. Witnesses stepped forward once evidence became visible. A roadblock formed using a partial plate reflection. The organized ring unraveled through documented proof rather than speculation. A torn strip of fabric caught on a signal post had seemed insignificant until it matched the mask material later recovered behind the shed. The partial license plate reflection glimpsed in slush became the key detailed dispatch used to coordinate the roadblock. The industrial plastic tie pattern, noticed while kneeling in the snow, linked multiple incidents across towns. The mismatched reflective vest exposed a false authority when identification failed verification. Silver duct tape on the van's side mirror allowed witnesses to confirm the same vehicle in separate sightings. The quick screenshot of a messaging app with clustered rail pins opened the path to multi-site investigation. The unlocked transit control box justified the emergency lever under imminent threat, protecting the action from procedural dispute. A drop transit badge connected the impersonator to the larger network. The early vibration of the rail, logged later in official reports, demonstrated the danger had been measurable rather than imagined. You are making drama for attention. Nobody asked you to be a hero. I did not tie myself here. Please do not leave me. Step back and let me work. This is about seconds, not opinions. Down now. Heel and watch. He followed procedure under imminent threat. Discipline and compassion save lives when noise tries to stop you.